Well, welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. Whether you're here live with us right now, or if you are joining us on the replay, we're so grateful that you're present and that you're here with us today. We have an amazing group of panelists that are going to share so much information and knowledge with us about the topic of moral injury. And I couldn't find a more amazing way to really honor and just be with the idea of Veterans Day, other than you showing up here and learning how to help veterans. So I truly believe knowledge is power, and we hold this space so that whether you're a veteran, first responder, someone that this resonates with, you can take that knowledge and create power either for yourself or share it out and assist someone else that might be in need. So my name is Charity, and I am a 21-year Navy veteran, and I'm a lead teacher with Yoga for Change. And I'm super honored to be your moderator today. Yoga for Change is an organization where we foster holistic well-being, transformation, and resilience, both in individuals and then as a community. And we do that using trauma-informed curricula and evidence-based approaches. Our hope is that folks that have been impacted by trauma can then go out and live their life powerfully and joyfully. So, moral injury. When I was asked to moderate the panel, I said yes. And then I realized I didn't really know much about moral injury. So I went and I read definitions, I read articles, I watched videos. And like one of the definitions I'm going to share with you, it was from Syracuse University. And it said moral injury is the damage done to one's conscience or moral compass when that person perpetrates, witnesses, or fails to prevent acts that transgress one's own moral beliefs, values, or ethical codes of conduct. And even though I read that and it resonated, I thought, well, that's PTSD, isn't it? And so I really struggled trying to figure out where those two things were different. And then we had a dry run for this exact session today, and the panelists were there and they started to share. And what they shared was so powerful and profound to me that it made a lasting, very quick impact of what the differences are and what I could do, and that's what I suffered from versus as much PTSD. And each one of them had a point that I jotted down, and it stuck with me. One was, it's a base layer issue. Moral injury is a base layer issue. It's shame-based, and it's the extra invisible injury. So I'd invite you, if any comment, if any word resonates with you today, jot it down, come back to it if you want to explore more about moral injury. And as a little disclaimer, if you're a veteran, a first responder, anyone that has suffered any type of trauma, during this panel and discussion, if you ever start to feel a little uncomfortable sensations in your body, take some deep breaths. Really ground into where you are. Feel your feet on the ground and continue to notice your breath, and then come back and be with the discussion. If that seems very new to you, if it's unusual to hear that, maybe stay a little bit afterwards and I can share some more techniques with you. So now to begin our discussion. So we have three amazing panelists. The first one, we've got Dr. Tracy Hemanowski, who is a former Navy Lieutenant Commander, clinical psychologist. We have Jeff Bachman, an Army veteran and mentor with the Hillsborough County Veteran Treatment Court. And we have Diane Scotland Coogan, a licensed clinical social worker, assistant professor at St. Leo University, and director of behavioral health at the Veterans Heat Factory. So with that, we're going to launch into some questions for each of the panel members. We have a couple that are for all of the panel members to answer, and then we have left time at the end for you to ask questions and for us to share more resources with you. So just to get started here, get to know a little bit more about the panel members, we're going to go around and let them introduce themselves and share with them how what they do connects to this topic of moral injury. So Tracy, can we start with you, please?
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here speaking with you today and looking forward to the discussion later on. As mentioned, I'm a psychologist. I've worked with veterans, active duty, and their family members for the past 23 years. I only work with that population with the exception of COVID, where I worked with Gen Pop for a little while because of the increase in demand for services. I ran the Deployment Health Center at NES Jacksonville, Florida for 11 years and have been involved with the duty. I'd been in uniform prior to that. It was very clear to me over that time that moral injury was becoming more and more prevalent and really the presenting issue. We have done a lot of things. We did a lot of innovative programs there, equine assisted therapy, scuba assisted breathing, exposure therapy, and lots of combat stress groups. And again, that theme of moral injury came up often. I was a lead facilitator for veteran active duty and family member retreats with Gratitude America for 10 years. I pivoted several years ago to start my own nonprofit for first responders, so very much akin. We're basically sister organizations now. I'm an embedded provider with 2 sheriff's offices, so I'm their sort of under the table 24/7 behavioral health consultant, which has been very interesting, and again has kind of mirrored what we see in many ways in the military. And I work with Army Special Forces working on reintegration after deployments, and I can tell you that much like the conventional forces, Special Forces is really embracing mental health and really trying to stay on top of it, and the conversations and the narratives are really open, so it's been fantastic.
Thank you, Tracy, very much. And Jeff, we'll move to you next.
Yeah, hi everybody. Jeff Bachman. I am currently volunteering as a line mentor with the Hillsborough County Veterans Treatment Court. How this kind of intersects for me quite a bit is part of that mentoring is battle buddying people and mentoring them, veterans who have been charged with a crime, and if they make it through the program, the charges are dismissed. But part of that is assisting them and kind of coaching or mentoring through various treatments and various modalities. These are some that I work with myself, either through the Warrior Wellness Program or when I was at Fort Valor or various other veterans nonprofits. And, really developing a relationship with them as well as the brothers I served with, I start to hear similar stories over and over again. What's at the heart of some measure of discord internally, and it starts coming down more and more to this when we dig and, we're honest with each other, it starts coming down to more and more about this moral injury. So, I'm fascinated to participate here and learn more myself so I can assist better on my role. That's all I got, Charity.
Thank you, Jeff, very much. And Diane. And Diane, I think you're still muted, my friend.
I am. See, I followed directions while I muted myself. Dr. Diane Scotland Coogan. I'm an assistant professor at St. Leo University teaching grad school, future therapists. I've started a couple nonprofits in this area of Tampa. One was Service Dogs for veterans with PTSD, and also now the Veterans Heat Factory, where we do a lot of mental health work, in which we have really had to work on moral injury. And we have found that it is almost more pervasive than PTSD, I believe, because you have it with PTSD and you can have it without PTSD. And I'm not sure that we can be brought up in this country with the morals that are presented to us and then sent to war and not have some sort of repercussions of our experiences there, of last minute decisions and that sort of thing. So we have learned that moral injury is something we need to assess for as well, because we were basically working with PTSD. And I don't think you can help someone heal without addressing that moral injury piece. So it's very important. I'm so glad you're doing this.
Diane, thank you very much. So without further ado, we're going to jump into our questions. And we'll start with Tracy. And the question that we have for you, Tracy, is what is moral injury? A couple little sub questions there. Are there different types, or is it all one and the same? And who is susceptible to moral injury?
So you had mentioned, Jody, that moral injury is an extra invisible injury. And I would agree with that and say that it's also somewhat intangible, abstract. It's the kind of thing that you know if you have it, but it's difficult to put words to. I think our lexicon, our vocabulary in general tends to shrink or stop where profound emotional experiences begin, whether it's extreme love or hatred or something like moral injury. So it can have lasting effects. I think when I think about the mind, body, heart, and soul effects of serving in the military and on deployment, we pay a lot of attention to the mind body. We do cognitive behavior therapy, and we focus on thoughts, and we focus on bodily symptoms, sleep and irritability and hypervigilance and those types of things, or startle response. Moral injury to me focuses on the other two, the heart and soul aspects of us, which of course are metaphorical heart and the very abstract concept of soul. Whether people see that as a form of spirituality, I see it more of an existentialism, the existence, the meaning of life. And it can really turn things upside down, and it's very insidious. It can creep in, and it's not as obvious to someone who experiences it. They sense that something is wrong and something has changed, and they may be called very different. They're not the same person. They may seek to go back to normal or their homeostasis. But moral injury can have a really lasting effect, and that effect is not always bad. But it can certainly start that way. And we'll talk, obviously, as the conversation goes on, we'll talk more about some of the good and bad of it. But it's, as you said, an event that happens that is either, as you said, you're perpetrating, failing to keep something from happening. I would also add that it can be something that you witness or something that you receive. When I think about this chart in my head, that we can wear, veterans can wear, active duty can wear 3 hats. You can be participant in some kind of transgression, a recipient of it, or a witness to it. And you can be wearing all 3 hats at the same time. When you think about transgressing the moral code, it's something that we can do or others can do. And it creates, depending on the event, it could have something to do with mortality, it can have something to do with injustice, something with inhumanity. And those things just fester inside. And I think a lot of people have been struggling with this for a long time because they haven't had a framework by which to think about it, to have it be called something so that we can, kind of move forward and break open so that we don't break down. The different types that I see it kind of going in 2 different directions when moral injury happens is one that can affect someone's sense of religious certainty. So they might struggle with their religion or their spiritual faith, or they may feel like they've lost their faith. Another direction that it may go in is more psychological, so that you see some behavioral changes, some social and relational interactive changes, and that there's a distress, and that distress comes from a fundamental disappointment in oneself or other people, or a sense of despair or powerless. There's nothing I could have done about it. There's nothing I can do about it. And that, of course, leads to secondary effects of anger and guilt and shame. So we often say that the impact of moral injury can be a sense of betrayal, or truly because betrayal happened. We see that across veteran communities, first responder communities, that unit or agency or organizational betrayal is beyond adding insult to injury. You know, it's kind of like that final nail in the coffin, so to speak. So it really—
1 minute, Tracy. 1 minute.
Okay, thank you. It disrupts our sense of trust. As I mentioned, we could have guilt or shame, self-condemnation. We can really have our sense of meaning and purpose of life be disrupted and be confused. We can have difficulty with forgiveness when our foundational baseline of this is right and wrong, and this is my moral code and my moral compass, and now someone else who I trusted has changed that, or I have acted against my own value system. So I think that the impact can be far and wide and very deep, both intrapersonal and interpersonal.
Wow, Tracy, thank you so very much. One of the things that you said at the very beginning really was, I felt it deep in my bones. It was how these very kind of wild emotional experiences, these actual experiences that we have, sometimes we can't put words to it, you know, and so it can be very challenging to express that, like if you go to talk to somebody or whatever. And so I know later we're going to share some different approaches to that. And so, yeah, stay tuned, y'all, if that resonated. Thank you, Tracy. All right, Jeff, it is your turn. Your question today is, what is moral injury as it relates to veterans specifically?
Yeah, you know, honestly, I don't know that I'm qualified to speak for all veterans by any means, but I did serve myself, spent 6 years in the light infantry. And I can speak about my experience, and some of those are the people I interact with quite often. I think that might be helpful. And it's kind of along the lines of some of the things that Tracy brought up. You know, a question I hear a lot from myself and from others is, was it worth it? And when we look at that, what is that thing? That means that I did something, I sacrificed something, or I took some form of action that I may not have otherwise. And when you come down to every man and woman in the service, they do this for either their communities as a first responder, for their nation, for their society as a whole, for their beliefs. And now they're being asked, or they did something that kind of went against maybe some societal norms or their personal norms. And then that creates this discord or this dissonance inside. And so they start ruminating, you know, and that's a common technique with the veterans to, you know, kind of process that. And, you know, through that rumination, again, you just hear this question, was it worth it? And personally, one of the examples I'll give is I served in, we were deployed, the 10th Mountain was deployed to Bosnia back in 1999. And part of that mission was obviously to maintain certain peace, but it was also to help them as they were working through some of the wounds of their own genocide. And so we would be patrolling and guarding different areas and mass grave sites. And then a few months ago, I watched a documentary on what it's like there now. And I had no clue. I haven't been there in 20 years. And I hear the president of the Republic of Srpska say the genocide in Srebrenica was a fabricated myth. And, you know, this shocked me. Like internally, it just like rung true because I saw it. I saw the graves. I saw the open bodies. You know, I saw the sausage factory where they would spit them out to the river. So I knew personally I was a witness. And to hear somebody 20 years later, who's now a leader over there that we were trying to support, you start to ask yourself, was this worth it? I talked to my friends. I didn't serve in Afghanistan, but the example from a lot of my friends who did is I didn't quite understand when the pullout happened and why it was affecting my friends quite as much as it was. I understood the inherent issues with it, but how we exited there did not sit well with them. And, again, I had to put it in context, because they're looking at, I was there in 04 or 06, 12, and here we are this many years later. Was this worth it? Was that loss of my friend? Was my sacrifice worth it that I did such things? And I hear this again and again with the people I mentor, where they will now look for some way to seek out some kind of equity and fairness because they felt like that hasn't been done to them, that at this point. And that really, if love and these positive emotions is such a driving underlying factor, I think some of the shame associated with these moral injuries is just as much. And it comes out on the opposite end and really amplifies and gives it some volume. And so a lot of them, as it relates to veterans, they find other maybe battles to fight, whether it be through the VA, I'm going to attack the system, or through the court process, or they just reject society's rules altogether. And, commonly what I'm seeing is when this, okay. And commonly what you'll see when the veteran is facing that moral injury, they don't know it, but their instinct is to either fight back or retreat. And that retreat sometimes, unfortunately, is within inside themselves, and which isn't helping, and it gets into that rumination loop. Or some of them just want to leave society altogether, which is very common. Why there's such an increase in homelessness, or not increase, it always has been within the veteran community. So, again, I don't know that I'm qualified to speak for all veterans, but this is the observations I've seen from the people I've worked with, and many of my friends and battle buddies as well. So that's all I have on that point there, Charity.
Jeff, thank you so much. That question of, was it worth it? Or even how you expressed, not being able to speak for all veterans, but you have your story that you shared, and it was so vulnerable. And I appreciate that so much that you shared that, because sometimes we forget that maybe we weren't in a certain place where we think it's the worst, but we can still experience these impacts and these traumas in various ways that cause moral injury, cause PTSD, all of these different things. So thank you for sharing, Jeff. All right, and Diane. So Diane, your question today is, how is moral injury different from PTSD? And the couple sub questions under there are, what are the signs of moral injury, and do moral injury and PTSD overlap in any way?
Did it again. They do overlap, absolutely. So let's start out with what the similarities might be. So we would see anger, depression, insomnia, nightmares, and even self-medicating with both PTSD and moral injury. They are both based on having experienced life-threatening situations or being a part of a life-threatening situation. And they both can have some aspects of shame and guilt. But when we want to look specifically at PTSD, we have to look at the fact that PTSD is a physical wound. It is an overactive stress response. So we have an overabundance of cortisol and adrenaline in our brains. Our stress response was meant to assess a threat, figure it out, and then calm. But when you're deployed, you are going to be in a state of threat constantly. And your brain was never meant to do that. So what ends up happening? A part of your brain that handles memory actually shrinks. Not that that's permanent, but this is exactly what Tracy was talking about with having trouble finding words, because there is a verbal memory deficit. There's all sorts of things that go on in your brain that make it harder for you to express yourself. That is with PTSD, but we can also see that in moral injury as well. And that could be for many reasons. The fact that we are told not to have feelings and we've shut them down as a part of our military training. But so with PTSD, we have to look at a physical wound, and it affects your ability to think clearly. It can affect your ability to manage emotion. It also affects digestion. It affects your immune system. And so it's a very physical piece. Now, moral injury, on the other hand, so we look at the cause of PTSD, I'm sorry, as fear-based. It happened in a fear situation. I was trying to protect myself or those around me. Moral injury, however, has a shame base. I did something wrong. I didn't stop something from happening. And we have to look at that in a very different way of treatment, because we can look at prolonged exposures and that sort of thing to discuss fear conditioning and fear-based. We can't do that with shame-based. We don't want to reinforce the shame. And so we use different types of treatments, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But even if you look at brain scans, the part of the brain that's active when you have PTSD is the amygdala, our emotional part of our brain. That's what's going to be really active. When you look at moral injury brain scans, it is more about our integration of information, how we perceive information, how we react to information, mental imagery. So it's a very different part of our brain that's being activated when we're feeling moral injury and shame. And so when we look at dealing with moral injury, we have to deal with that core belief of I'm not good enough, or I did something bad, which is, we talk about our inner critic. Everyone has an inner critic that tells you you don't do things well, you're not good enough, somebody does it better than you, you made a big mistake. And so that is just perpetuated in moral injury, that we do, as Jeff was talking about, that rumination. So we come back from deployment where we were very busy and very focused on survival, and now we have time to think, and we start to ruminate on all the things that happened and could I have done things differently and that sort of thing. And so we see a lot of regret, a lot of self-blame, a lot of alienation, right? As Tracy was talking about with relationships.
And it puts you on mute, Diane.
Yeah.
And I just wanted, now that we have a little moment, you've got 1 minute.
Okay. And so we want to, the alienation, so we lose our social supports, which is a huge healing factor for moral injury, is that support and acceptance. And so the other piece that is there is you feel like you don't deserve to feel better because of what I've done. So I have vets that won't even allow themselves to attend treatment because they say, I deserve to feel this way. And we just have to let them know that no one deserves to feel that way over decisions that were made in an instant that were life or death. So they are very different, and their treatment is different.
Diane, thank you so much for sharing that point of PTSD, fear-based, moral injury, shame-based. That's huge. It's the key to starting to unlock which avenue, which bucket you're falling into. So thank you so much for sharing it in that way. So the next question we have is for all three of you, and we'll start with Jeff, then we'll go to Tracy, and then Diane. And for this question, we'll have about 3 minutes or so for each of you to answer. And the question is, how, now that we know what moral injury is, we have this nice foundation of knowledge of, okay, what is it? How do we overcome it? What kind of resources available to help us overcome it? Is it something that can be overcome? So Jeff, we'll start with you.
Yeah, this is a hard one for me because I'm not a professional in this area or have the qualifications that Tracy and Diane do. But when I'm working with the veterans, and even with myself sometimes, it's about getting to a place of acceptance, maybe with a capital A acceptance, in such a large grand scheme of, this happened, whether I liked it or not, this thing happened, whether it's based on an individual trauma, a series of events, or just a situation in general. And that's not an easy thing to do, because that requires you, number one, to recognize that something did happen, so you have to go there first, and then work your way through it and really be self-analytical. And I don't think most of us are capable of that on our own. So working with a true professional in that area, and some of those organizations, whether it's Camaraderie Foundation or the organization that Diane's involved with, which will be up later with the heat, and working with those therapists, I think is huge, because they can help get you there. I sometimes wonder if it's valuable even with my battle buddies, somebody I served with, because sometimes they want to just commiserate, which is valuable in and of itself, but it doesn't necessarily get you moving forward per se, and it may even drag you back down in some ways. So working with them and finding a modality that is able to give you some of that room and that space to breathe, that's as different as the veteran, whether it's the scuba diving, jujitsu, yoga, any of these modalities, they all work. I have a friend who paints, and it gives him that space where he's activating a different part of his brain. And then working with those professionals to kind of get to that place of acceptance, and for some people that may be through some form of spiritual path. For others, it's going to be licensed professionals and working with that. But there's a ton out there. There's a ton of resources. We're not lacking resources. We're lacking people tapping their battle buddy on the shoulder and saying, hey, I think you need to go talk to this person, because resources are out there and are available. But I'm fascinated to hear from Tracy and Diane, so I'll kind of cede some time there.
Can I jump in here?
Can you share? Yeah, go for
okay.
it.
I think you did a fantastic job, Jeff, of talking about that, and I'll piggyback off of what you said. I think one interesting thing you said was commiserate, and in therapy, I say, there's a lot of value in cathartic ventilation. We just need to get things off of our chest or off of our heart or out of our soul. And I was thinking of the word commiserate is co-misery. And so misery loves company, and that is valuable. And I think that connection of the three things that I think people need, or we need, to overcome moral injury, because we all experience it, some form of passion through life, is connection, self-awareness, and openness. Not in that order, and quite in fact the opposite order. But so with openness, being able to, as you said, accept, we say like radically accept. That does not mean approve of, or it's a simple acknowledgement of this occurred, and with a lot of grace and forgiveness, shifting from I should have or I shouldn't have to I could have or couldn't have, had I been, had I had more information, had I had more time to make a decision, had my neural pathways been, already set in that direction for that, if it's something that shocks my conscience and I have to make a split-second decision, it's very unforgiving and condemning, to then Monday morning quarterback and say, what was I thinking? So to be able to go from should or shouldn't to could have to I wish I had been able to, wishing and longing and yearning for a different kind of outcome to have been the case, is different than the condemning, guilt. And Diane, when you said guilt and shame, someone had said once to me, the big difference between guilt and shame is that guilt is about what we've done or not done, and shame is about who we are or think we are or are not. So you can imagine that shame is much heavier. And guilt, on top of that, guilt is a pro-social behavior. So we want to make amends, make a repair, we want to overcompensate. And so we seek people out when we feel guilty because of an action that we've done. When we internalize and say, I am or I am not this person, then it's an anti or non-social result. I want to dig a hole and crawl in it. When people talk about shame in therapy, they look down. They'll almost go fetal position, but they will avert their gaze almost every time, because there's a humility to it, which is a good sign. So I think the openness and being able to speak of things and not about them. I tell people this all the time. If you bring in people who love you and you trust, that you can speak of things, right? The umbrella topic where something happened, X, Y, and Z, and this was, and you can give zero details. But you don't have to speak about those things, but you can talk about themes of betrayal, of tragedy, of fear, of whatever the case may be, or of regret. So in addition to openness, self-awareness is important. I have done some therapists, if there's any therapists here, or people have been in therapy, if you know of the empty chair technique, it can be really, really powerful. One of the things that veterans
Tracy,
are often
about 30 seconds, Tracy.
Okay, veterans contend with that, that struggle of human and warrior. And the conversation, if you have two chairs and you have a person sit in either chair and talk to the other entity, how dare you do that? I can't believe you did. Why would you have done something like that? And then you switch chairs and you take on the other persona of human, and it can be a really powerful thing. The last thing is connection, finding friends, and that goes to deserving it, right? But finding friends and people who are safe, who are also imperfect, which is everyone, and allowing yourself to be back in that tribe. There's a great book called Tribe by Sebastian Junger, Junger, and he talks about veterans need to heal when society heals, when there's a more communal tribal environment, and that's why they miss deployment. One of many reasons.
Tracy, thank you so much. Diane.
I should not be allowed to monitor my own mic. One of the things that Tracy said is so important is connection, because we are born to connect with people and belong with our community, and that shame separates us. So that brings out almost a primal anxiety in us. And so we have to really address self-forgiveness, which we say forgiveness is not about the past, it's about the future. So it's not saying what happened was okay, it's just saying, I've learned from this and now I can move forward a little bit. But huge piece of social support. And I also feel like when we are getting someone to talk about what happened, it's almost like spitting out the poison that is just keeping them stuck in that whole thing of moral injury. And how we respond to that venting of the situation is, again, what can be healing. We are accepting, we say, wow, you went through a lot. All of that lets them know that I don't look at you any differently for having this knowledge. And so we also want to think about their stage of development when they were in the service. They were in the stage of development where they were emotionally completely developed in their brain. Critical thinking doesn't really kick in fully till almost 30. So we have a lot of them making emotional decisions because their brain wasn't ready to make those kinds of decisions. 22, 24, they're just not ready to make those decisions. And now they are defining themselves by those moments later in life when they are more able to critically think about what happened. And I love what Tracy says about, I wish I would have been able to, because these situations were moments of time where you had to make a quick decision. And I think helping them understand that. I also believe mindfulness is a great healer. So we're talking about jujitsu, we talk about yoga, so huge, breath work, all of that, which helps calm the anxiety response, giving me the ability to think more clearly and open up. We have a peer support group on Thursday nights where the therapists are not welcome because they want to talk to each other. They just want to be surrounded by other veterans. And they really enjoy that. We do actually have a therapist there, but she's a veteran, so it's okay. She does a great job of keeping things on track. But again, that feeling of connection, how to heal your body, self-forgiveness, those are all very important pieces. And the final piece is understanding that we do build new neural connections every time we have a thought or a memory come forth. So when we have these, there's my 3 minutes. When we have these memories come up, to stop and change, and even using maybe what Tracy said, I wish I could have been able to. I did the best I could. When those memories come up, we now create neural networks tied to that memory that when I think about it again, it will come with those thoughts as well. So being kind of a self-advocate when you're struggling.
Thank you, Diane. Whew, that is a lot in a short period of time that we're learning. The beauty, if you're here live with us or if you're watching the replay, this is being recorded to put onto YouTube. So that way, if something resonated with you and you just can't quite remember maybe the exact thing that was said or whatever, you can go back and watch the replay. So that's going to be out there for everyone. Last question that we have from our formulated questions before we invite any inward. This question is just going to be kind of a quick answer type of thing. And the question is, so what can I do? What can I do now to help my battle buddy or to help myself if I believe that I'm dealing with moral injury, or if I believe that after hearing all of these things that, hey, maybe this is what my spouse is dealing with or my battle buddy is dealing with. What do I do now? So we'll go Tracy, Diane, and then Jeff.
So since most people who are listening are probably very service oriented and are very other oriented, I would say that it's important to focus on your healing and to be able to pay it forward for other people, because we always get our sense of accomplishment and vicarious happiness through serving others. And you can do that starting off with, like, look up the moral injury symptom scale, learn about moral injury to see if that's something that you might be dealing with and struggling with. It's probably going to be worked. It's currently being worked into the diagnostic manual because it's so prevalent. There are moral injury workbooks that you can go through and fill in and read and learn and work on. There are wonderful books out there. There's one called Conflict, which talks about like split-second decision making that military members have to make. There are retreats. I run retreats, as I said, and I think they're phenomenal because it's very tribal and communal. But we learn, and the communication there's a lot of crosstalk. Gratitudeamerica.org is the one that's in Northeast Florida and Georgia. First Responder Project is our sister organization. Doing things like creative expression, where you get out of your verbal part of your brain and trying to do other things like mask making. So taking a mask, a three-dimensional mask, and without words, creating and representing your identity, with including the struggle that may be there, your struggle within yourself, you and the world around you. I think that we'll show a video at the very end that's something that you could use to reach out to a battle buddy and say, hey, did you ever see this video? It's actually a commercial now. And it's a minute-long video. I think as long as you're reaching out to other people and trying to describe and say, hey, I just heard about this thing. It really hit me. Does it make any sense to you? Do you think that this is maybe what we've been, and having that, that just normalization and being able, as I said, like hang your hat on something that is descriptive. And then I always say, keep your boot firmly placed in someone's backside. So if you say, hey, there's this retreat, you want to go with me? It's my battle buddy, or why don't you, I think you should go, and follow up, yank them by the ear, like tough love people, as much as humanly possible.
Excellent.
Tracy and Diane.
I think the first thing, and what Tracy said, is normalizing this, that you are not alone, that many people are struggling with moral injury. And as Tracy said, it's getting to the point where we really think it's going to be showing up in the diagnostic manual for therapy. The issue comes with something I mentioned before, that inner critic, which we're born with. That's our caveman brain that just tries to keep us safe by having us tell ourselves that we're not capable of anything. So we stay in our comfort zone and we don't step out. We don't take any risk. What it does is make us feel like we are not lovable, that we're not worth it, all of that. So if you have moral injury, that negative self-talk is just going to make it grow. So you really have to work against that, knowing that that negative inner critic is in everybody's brain, not just you. We all have to fight that feeling of being unworthy. The other thing is getting out of the imposter syndrome. Like, people don't really know me. If you knew who I really was, you wouldn't want anything to do with me. And that's a struggle because we all feel like we're putting on a face, but the fact of the matter is, the person that you are portraying is who you are, because you are making a choice every day to be a good person, to make good choices. And so maybe that inner critic brain is telling you to do things or to be selfish, and you aren't. That just means that's who you are choosing to be. That is your true character, the one that you are displaying. So you have to know that. And then talking about it, finding someone you feel safe to talk to about it, whether it's a therapist or a battle buddy. Get it out. And the healing is in saying it out loud. So I think that along with doing anything you can to use your creative side to get out and be mindful, which for my vets, I say, go outside, sit in your yard and notice everything in your yard. What color are the birds? What color are the lizards? Obviously I live in Florida. The leaves, just noticing everything that calms your brain. It's like yoga and being present. Your chemicals of stress can't flow when you're in the moment. So taking that time for yourself.
Thank you so much, Diane. And Jeff.
Yeah, when I think about this, how can I better serve my battle buddies, my fellow veterans with a moral injury specifically? Number one, the first thing that comes to my mind is connection, developing a relationship with them. And then, because that has just massive benefits across the board. Two is finding the courage to ask some questions and help guide them maybe a little bit, because I may be in a position, I have some objectivity and I can help them a little bit. It's not the same as therapy, but the mentees that I work with that are in a veterans treatment court have all been arrested for something. And 9 times out of 10, it's drug and alcohol related. So how did you get here? And then it'll start, so-and-so, blah, blah, blah. This unfair thing happened to me. Well, that's not how you got here. Like, why were you doing this activity? Well, it's because of this and this and this. Well, why were you doing that when you know this? And it takes a long time to really have that. And frankly, it's an uncomfortable thing for me to kind of drill down there. But then it's also, I'd say, combine that courage with a whole lot of patience and non-judgmental responses and let them get there. They have to get there on their own. Why is this? And it usually comes down to, it's unfair. I don't like this. Why did I fight for this? And I want to move to Mexico. And it's like, and then the patience and the courage to say, okay, listen, like, let's game plan an idea. And just, I think that connection, that understanding, just the listening, active listening during that, in my role, is incredibly powerful. That's why it's one of our best practices at the court. We don't ever tell them anything. We help guide them a little bit.
30 seconds, Jeff.
Yeah. And then when I'm like, hey, have you talked to your therapist about this? Because they'll talk to the therapist about a lot of stuff, but usually not this deep base layer issue that's underlying all this. And I think a lot of us don't even know that's something appropriate to talk to them about, because you've heard from Tracy and Diane these great techniques. There's stuff out there to do that can help address this, and just having the courage to speak up and be there for them, I think, is incredibly valuable.
Thank you all so very much. At this point, we have a few minutes for questions. So I'm going to jump in the chat and see if we have any. We don't have any questions in the chat, but does anyone that is in attendance, does anyone have a question they want to ask a particular panel member or put out to any of the panel members? And if you do, you could just take yourself off mute and jump on in. Any of you have any questions?
Yes, I have one of my veteran inmates here.
Yes.
Hi, can you see? I didn't catch the beginning of the class, so I'm not exactly sure what moral injury, what it all pertains. Is there any more definition about what it,
The official definition.
official definition?
That's what I'm trying to.
Yeah, because it sounds like something I need to check with, really. Listening, I just caught the last part of this class. I was talking to my lawyer. So I really, it sounds like something I need to check in. Is there additional information?
Yeah, thank you so much for your question. So if I'm understanding, you're asking, like, is there an official definition? And did any of the panel members want to jump in on that one?
I think
Go ahead, Tracy, because that was your.
Well, I'll just say it real quickly and you jump right in. I think that it really comes down to transgression of morality, of either self or other. So we transgress our own moral code or our concept of right and wrong. We know a certain thing to be, we hold this to be our belief system and we act against it. Or in a wartime environment, in extremists, in this depraved environment, split-second decision making or impossible decisions where somebody's going to get hurt. Then we get into these moral ethical binds. So it's really about transgression. If other people transgress, we are disappointed, we might be resentful or disgusted or feel betrayed, and so we have trust issues. If we transgress, then we have problems with our identity. We can get depressed and anxious, and really it really hurts our ability to connect with people because we feel like damaged goods.
And I would just add that that it's moral injury is the shame that we suffer for having watched something and not stepped in and done something about it, or having perpetrated it ourselves. That really goes against our moral compass and the morals that we were brought up with. And so we may not think about it a lot in the moment because we were in survival mode, but afterwards, when we get a chance to think about it, we want to blame ourselves for maybe not making a more well thought out decision, which we really didn't have the opportunity to do. So Tracy's I wish I had had the ability to do it differently. In the moment, we're doing the best we can. And also thinking that in the moment we are in fight, flight, or freeze, right? And that is changing how I think and process information. So it is about going against your moral code, which could be very different in war times.
Thank you both for answering that. I think we might have time for maybe one more question. So if somebody has this like burning question that they're waiting to ask, feel free to jump off of you.
I have one more veteran who's coming up to the microphone.
All right.
Hello. I want to ask if I know I have moral injury, of course. I've done a lot of things I'm not proud of. I've seen a lot of things I'm not proud of seeing. But either way, if I'm not eligible for VA medical, I've never heard of this at any side. I've never heard of moral injury outside of this setting discussed. So where would I go and what would I do to get treatment for moral injury if I'm not a veteran? Thank you.
And you said, let me clarify. So you are a veteran, but you're not part of the VA system. That's correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
One thing that you can do is look to organizations that run retreats and run programs. I listed one in the chat. It's gratitudeamerica.org. And they do not care if you have what they like, bad paper, good paper, whatever. They do not care about your discharge. They want to bring you in and they want you to bring a primary support person. That can be a battle buddy. They can be another veteran. It can be a family member or whomever. But there are a lot of organizations that are focusing on giving people education and opportunity to heal. And it is, we are fully aware, and those are usually organizations run by veterans who are fully aware that things happen, and especially in a time of deployment or war, that we cannot judge back here on the other side. Just as we, encourage you not to judge yourself and that you're doing the best you could do with what you had at the time. Those organizations often, recognize that this is the nature of the beast. And so we can't condemn people for that. We have to focus on healing them.
I also think it's important to say that we cannot define ourselves from our past, because we're always learning and growing and becoming different people. And so I commend you for even asking that, because it really shows a sign that you want things to be better for yourself. And that's amazing. And, even here at the Veterans Heat Factory, we do not care if you have VA coverage or not. We are a free service, mental health, couples, individuals, family. We do group and peer groups. And so I think Tracy's great. Just look for veteran services. Doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have VA coverage.
And you can also get additional resources from veteran centers, not the VA, but vet centers, which are like the mom and pop shop. They're oftentimes either freestanding or in a strip mall, and they will know about other resources for you.
Wonderful, wonderful. So hopefully that helps a little bit to answer that question. And I'm going to call on Shiva, who is running our IT support. We also have a resource slide with each of our panelists' information that Shiva is going to share up on the screen. You can either take a screenshot if you have your phone handy, or we are going to be emailing these out. And so that way you can print them out, you'll have them available to you, and you can research each of the different organizations where the panel members were kind of talking about that they offer their support and that they organize and run. So we've got the veteran panel resources here. And then we also have some Yoga for Change free yoga classes that are specific to veterans. You can also find all of this online under our Yoga for Change website, the www.y4c.org, and you'll find these under events. And here are different ways to follow Yoga for Change. And finally, a little bit about questions, comments about Yoga for Change itself. We do have a 1-minute video, but I'm going to close first just to be mindful of folks' time, because I know it is noon. And so, but if you can stick around for this video, it would be awesome. So to close though, this session, just thank you. Thank you to the panelists. This was an enormous amount of information about something that is so just like not even talked about. It's just not talked about. PTSD has all of this, and then it's kind of like it's this, or I'm just needing to talk to somebody. There's not much in between. So thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your work that you're doing. And thank you everyone for attending. Whether you're a veteran, a first responder, whether you know a veteran or not, thank you for showing up and getting this knowledge to share out there to the world. It needs to be shared. More people need to know. So continue to share this. If you're watching on YouTube or you go to our YouTube, copy and paste it into your social media. Get the word out about what moral injury is and how we can overcome it. So if you need to leave, feel free. But if you would like to watch this 1-minute video, Shiva will pull it up for you. Thank you so very much. That was the first time I saw that. So thank you for sharing, and thank you for being here.
I would encourage people to look that up again if you can. I couldn't hear this. This has music with it, which makes everything sound better, look better, right? But it's a really powerful video on the internal struggle that we all have, every single one of us.
And Shiva, would you like me to go ahead and stop the recording?